Right, joining me now is the campaign director of Defund the BBC, Rebecca Ryan, former Ofcom chief media advisor Martin Campbell, BBC 100 fellow and author Marcus Collins, political commentator and former Lib Dem spin doctor Joe Phillips. Right, so in an interestingly written list there, I have to talk to these people about listen to me. Honestly, listen, some heads are going to start rolling later on. I'm going to start with you, Rebecca Ryan. You're Defund the BBC. Talk to me, Rebecca. Your thoughts on this. Was the BBC right to suspend Gary?
Absolutely, it was right to suspend Gary. The BBC is obliged under the terms of its charter to be impartial and to unify the country. That's what it is actually legally obliged to do in order that it can tax the British people for watching any live broadcast TV. This is a fundamental tenet of how the BBC is funded. Now, it's really disturbing that Gary Lineker and all of his extremely privileged colleagues there do not understand the basic tenet on which the BBC funding is built. And if they want to carry on and have free speech, and I'm a great supporter of free speech, absolutely should be able to do that on a commercial broadcaster. But, you know, he can't do that whilst the BBC is funded by the licence fee.
Right, thank you for that. Well, I stand with you on that one. Let's go to former Ofcom chief media advisor Martin Campbell. Martin, what do you think about that? Were they right?
Yeah, absolutely they were right. But the problem is they should have done it a long time ago. They should have put their foot on this many weeks ago when they realised that he was breaking their impartiality rules, because the impartiality rules do talk specifically about high-profile BBC people. Well, there's none higher profile than Gary Lineker. And so there's absolutely no point, no reason why they shouldn't have acted before. Now they've acted, and of course you've got this strange solidarity thing going on. Well, what's it solidarity with? The idea that anyone working from the BBC can say whatever they want, or is it solidarity with his views that he expressed? I mean, it's a real mess, but it's of the BBC's own making, and it just shows what their internal compliance procedure is like.
It's a bit ad hoc, isn't it? Marcus Collins, political commentator and former Lib Dem spin. Marcus Collins, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree that it's a big mess. I think we can all see that. But I think that although we don't and shouldn't expect Gary Lineker to be impartial, I think the BBC's impartiality in suspending him is called into question, especially given what they have done yesterday also with the programme produced by David Attenborough. I think that the BBC is pandering to the current government, and that is the contravention of impartiality that we should be talking about.
But why would you say they're pandering to the government? He's made a political comment. He's not meant to be making political comment. How is that pandering to the government?
Well, Tim Davie came in as Director General saying that he wanted to institute guidelines for impartiality. I think the implication of that was really trying to buy off the government, which was threatening the BBC's existence. And I don't think that a sports commentator, his political views are neither here nor there. He's perfectly able to express them as a private citizen, which is what he's done. He's not talking about this on Match of the Day, and you would expect him to.
That doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference. No, it doesn't make any difference. Can I just tell you that, Marcus?
Free speech, as you have.
Marcus, it doesn't make any difference whether he was on Match of the Day saying it or somewhere else. It goes across the board. Joe Phillips.
Well, I would split hairs with you, Nana, because actually it doesn't go across the board. News presenters, as you know, are under much stricter rules and regulations about what they might say rather than entertainment or sports presenters. If he'd gone on Match of the Day and said the things he'd said, then I could absolutely understand the BBC doing this. But what you can't have is this pick and mix of what now looks exactly as Marcus just said, whether it's true or not. The perception is now that the BBC has bowed to political pressure. At the same time, Lord Alan Sugar and Baroness Karen Brady, both Tory peers, carry on The Apprentice. Alan Sugar endorsed the Tories in the 2019 election and backed Boris Johnson for the leadership.
Well, you just contradicted yourself. You've just contradicted yourself there, because
the BBC, who's been notably quiet, who is a Tory donor and facilitated a meeting which led to Boris Johnson getting a loan of £800,000. If you're going to have
Joe, can I just
guidelines,
say,
stick to them.
you just contradicted yourself, because on one side you said that it's totally different for a sports presenter and a news presenter. Then on the other hand, you brought in Sir Alan Sugar and used it as an example. So I'm confused here. The bottom line is, I know, Joe, have you ever worked for the BBC? Just out of interest.
Yes, I have.
Well, me too. And when I worked for the BBC, even though I wasn't in news, I lost two things because I made a comment on another channel, not even the BBC, because they felt it breached their impartiality guidelines. So I wasn't working for them at the time.
I used to produce political programmes,
and
I was
those are the rules.
censured for something that I did as a freelance for another organisation.
And I was a freelancer.
But, so yes, I know that, but I was working on news and politics programmes. Gary Lineker isn't, nor is Alan Sugar.
No, but I wasn't
point.
either.
You can't criticise what the BBC have done. They've handled this so badly because it looks as though they're caving into political pressure, because they haven't censured people like Alan Sugar or Karen Brady. And the question still remains about Richard Sharp, Tory donor, bunged in as a chairman, who's been notably silent.
But a lot of the time they always have political people who are affiliated to the kind of party who's in power with the people who were in power at the time. That's just not even unusual. Rebecca, what do you think? Because people seem to be giving Gary Lineker an excuse.
Absolutely. And I think the thing they're talking about, how all of this politicisation of the BBC, what it comes down to is British people are being bullied on their doorsteps and via coercive letters that are threatening them, coming out like red bills, with the threats of being sent to prison to fund this organisation. And it is obliged under its charter to be impartial. That's what it comes down to. All of this tit for tat, whataboutery that's going on here and going on across the country from the left and the right. At the end of the day, it has to be impartial. And if it's not impartial, which we know that it isn't, we need to get rid of the TV licence. At the end of the day, the BBC needs to be commercialised.
Yeah, and Marcus, what would you say to that? The BBC needs to be commercial, get rid of the TV licence in about 20 seconds?
Well, be careful what you wish for, I think. Obviously, the TV licence is an anachronism, but if you look at what Britain would be like culturally without the BBC, I think it would be a greatly impoverished place. And at a time when Britain is really facing a lot of reputational damage, the BBC is one of the last things standing that people outside of Britain value about Britain.
OK. Right, I hear you, and I've got to give my final 10 seconds then to Martin, because, Martin, you haven't had a chance to say. So we've only got 10 seconds. What are your thoughts?
I mean, the BBC are digging their own grave. I mean, straight quote from Tim Davie, if you want to be an opinionated columnist or partisan campaigner on social media, then that's a valid choice, but you should not be working at the BBC. Now,
I think that's a great way to end it. That's a great way to end it. Thank you very much to the director of Defund the BBC, Rebecca Ryan, former Ofcom chief media advisor Martin Campbell, BBC 100 fellow and author Marcus Collins, political commentator and former Lib Dem spin doctor Joe Phillips. Thank you so much for joining me.